How old were you when you came out?
I was, when I sort of told my sisters and friends, I was probably just finishing college. So I was probably about a senior in college. People came out much late. People come out much earlier now than when I was younger.
Was your family accepting?
Yes, I am. And it's very interesting, given my background. I went to actually Holy Rosary Elementary in West Seattle. And since I'm Irish and Catholic, I was somewhat concerned about how my family would react. But my sister said to me, well, we kind of knew all along. So.
Were there any struggles to coming out?
Sure. I mean, in those days, like when I was a kid, and even when I was in high school, I didn't know anybody that I didn't even know what the term meant. I wasn't even sure what was going on with me. So it was a struggle to figure out what that was about. It was a time when it was really dangerous to one of you turn on. It was a time when it was really dangerous to come out. You could lose a job. So I had to accept myself, and I spent a lot of time working on that. So it was a struggle.
Do people treat you differently now than they did before you came out?
It's a really interesting question. So I think there would be stages. I think when I came out in the early 1980s, there was a lot of stigma associated with it. So a lot of people treated us, including myself, not particularly well. Then when I was elected as his second openly gay official and went to I was in the legislature, as you may know, I was initially greeted with a lot of hostility by conservative legislators and a good deal of the public. As time has gone on, that reaction has only grown more and more positive. Not completely, but mostly accepting. So. Good questions.
And as mayor, is there anything that you're working on now or can continue to work on to make it feel safer and safer for those people to come out and be who they are?
Yeah. So, one of the things we're seeing post-election, not just for LGBT people, but for people of color, for Muslims, a whole bunch of groups, is a rise in harassment and sometimes even hate crimes. So we need to do several things. One is we need to educate the public that that's unacceptable. We need to educate people who might be victims of an assault or a hate crime about how to contact the police, contact us, contact the Civil Rights Office, so that we can also make sure that the police and the courts enforce the law. I also think it's really important, not just because I'm an elected official and gay, but that those of us who are in elective office, those of us who are in positions of authority, that we actually speak up and speak out and stand up.
And do you believe that someday that everyone will be accepting of others for who they are?
That's ultimately the hope. I think it's going to be a long journey. When I said you're in about the 8th grade. So, when I was in about the 3rd and 4th grade, when the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were passed by our Congress in D.C. to end discrimination against African Americans, I thought by now we would all get along, to use a phrase that I get tired of hearing, but that people would be more accepting. But it's a journey. It's a big journey.
And do you have some advice to help those maybe who don't still feel safe coming out about themselves?
Yeah, so if people don't feel safe because of their family or because of where they live, for instance, maybe in a rural area or maybe even in Seattle, I think it's very important for them to identify a counselor or an adult they trust, and to be sure they can connect with people so that when they come out, they're in a safe place. I wouldn't encourage young people to come out in a rural town unless they feel like they have the support around them. Too many of our homeless teenagers in this city, almost half, are LGBT, and a lot of that comes from kids, young people, being thrown out of their homes.
How do you reach out to the homeless LGBT youth?
So homelessness has grown exponentially in the last few years, but this issue has been around for a very long time. And as I think you know, I was in the State House for 11 years and in the Senate for 7 years, and the U District was part of my legislative district. So we spent a lot of time developing programs, either Teen Feed or Roots, which is a homeless shelter, or youth care. And I actually spend time going to those places personally and reaching out to homeless youth and homeless LGBT youth. One of the things that people talked about was, well, maybe LGBT youth, homeless youth, need their own shelter. And what we heard from those young people is they don't want to be separated from everybody else, because kind of figuring out who you are as a person and maybe who you're attracted to is sort of a process that people go through when they're teenagers, and they just didn't want to be lumped as one thing. So.
Also, what are your thoughts about businesses refusing to serve the LGBT community?
Well, first of all, it's against the law, and they shouldn't be allowed to do it. And I worked for a long, long time on a bill that was in 2006, which was the LGBT Civil Rights Bill. It said you can't discriminate in employment or financial transactions, and that means you can't refuse to, and in housing, you can't refuse to serve somebody at a restaurant or refuse to sell them a pair of shoes. You may remember you may have studied during the African American Civil Rights Movement, there'd be sit-ins at lunch counters because people would refuse to serve people because they were black at the lunch counter. Maybe you don't know the lunch counter. It's sort of a restaurant. They kind of went out it went out before I was even your age. So, but the point is, we can't go back there as a country. And just to talk a little bit about that piece of legislation. So, long before I was out or became involved, that legislation started in 1977, and it was finally passed. It was my bill in 2006. It took 29 years to basically say you can't not sell somebody something. You can't refuse to rent them an apartment or give them a job simply because of their sexual orientation.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you very
So,
much.
let me give you an example of how things have changed. So when my first few years in the legislature in the House, they were debating something, the Republicans were in control, and they were debating an issue called the Defense of Marriage Act. It was an anti-gay bill. So there are pages, the pages about your guys' age that work in Olympia or jackets, and they're there for a week. It's a great experience. If you ever have a chance to go down and do it, I encourage you to do it. But they made the young people your age leave the House floor so they couldn't hear the debate. One of those eighth graders was my nephew, who was my page, and they removed my nephew from the House floor so they wouldn't hear the debate on marriage equality. I'll tell you another big difference. I used to get invited to, I still do, to speak to classrooms, and in those days, if I came to your classroom, you'd have to have a permission slip signed, and lots of students left. Almost all the girls stayed, but a lot of the boys left. So the fact that you were here asking me these questions, it's like, wow, that's mind blowing. So, do you have any other questions about anything about being mayor or this issue?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. Good. Well.